Live from Austin, Texas, season 2 of the Identity Jedi Show podcast. We are here at XO Nightclub. Shout out to Tiffany for letting us come into this beautiful venue. And listen, I've been plugging this for months now, telling y'all it was going to be a surprise special guest. I'm so happy I can get here back in Austin in front of a live audience. Y'all give it up for yourselves and clap so people back in. Yeah. By the time y'all actually see this, I don't know if y'all can really hear them. I promise those aren't fake claps. There's actually people here. So listen, we're going to have a good time tonight. We've got the special guest who I'm getting ready to bring out. First, I got to tell you a little story about how I met this special guest. So this may be the only man I've ever met that speaks faster than I do. And we caught up in Vegas at Gartner, and we bonded over the fact that we've both done time at Amazon. If you know anything about Amazon, you understand how rough that was. But him and I both have a passion for identity. He reached out to me. He said, hey, I love what you're doing in the podcast. I want to come on. I want to be a co-host. I was like, listen, I'm gearing up for season 2. Let's do it. So right now, I want you guys to welcome to the Identity Jedi podcast for season 2 and beyond, the new co-host, Mr. Samir Saith. What's going on, man?
How you doing? Thank you.
Good, yeah. I have to first of all commend you on the selection of wine because this is excellent.
I don't think I had too many choices, but yeah, I like this one too. Yeah.
So, listen, we kind of talked a little bit in the pre-production meeting, and I wanted to kind of kick this off and get your take on where you feel like the state of identity is right now.
And that's a tough question, right? I mean, I think the state of identity from a vendor standpoint, I think is, I got to have everything.
Right.
Otherwise, I'm not going to get a deal or I'm not going to get a customer. I think from a customer standpoint, it's more of I'm fragmented, I'm stuck in a 3-year deal. How do I solve this now? Can I find shortcuts? Economy is not great. What do I do to fix it? But I think the state of identity going forward is going to be more of consolidation, probably some more acquisitions.
Yeah.
I think that the major players, I think you're going to talk a little bit more about this, hopefully, Okta and SailPoint and what they've been doing.
Yeah.
I think it's a sense of what's happening in security generally.
Right.
So I'm not surprised, but at the same time, I think the problem I see with the state of identity is who owns identity?
Yeah.
That's the scary part for me within a company, right?
Yeah.
It's always, I don't own it when it's not good, but I own it when it's good.
And I will say, and also I apologize to the audience, I did a horrible job of introducing Samir because I forgot to tell you, why Samir is such a special guest. So he is a former CISO of Whole Foods and now a co-founder of Balkan.id, an identity company. So when it comes to talking about identity and security, you can't get any better than that. Well, I mean, me, of course, obviously, but whatever. Yeah, I can't know everything. But yeah, so you're part about ownership of who owns identity, right? I think what's interesting is we've always kind of had this question, and it's evolved lately. So before, I would say about 10 years ago, it was who owns identity, right? And so it was the whole Spider-Man meme. HR was pointing over here, IT, security, everybody was pointing at each other, and everybody wanted to have something to do with it, but nobody wanted to own it, right? Everybody was I don't want to own it, but you need to do this. And I think now, some of the other kind of organizations have fallen apart, and now it's truly identity and security kind of fighting over where does identity really sit? Right. And I think it's interesting because security realizes identity is important, but they don't necessarily want to own it. But then the identity teams, the IT teams they don't think from a security mindset, right? They're just thinking administrative tasks, I gotta get this done, I gotta get this configured. Yeah. And so I'm starting to see this nice little tug of war between the two. And I think it's just gonna, ultimately, honestly, I think it's just gonna end up sitting in security, right? I'm starting to see CISO organizations take the identity teams from the CIOs, right? I'm also starting to see CIOs reporting into CISOs, which is interesting, right? I've never kind of seen that before. So I think over the next couple of years, we're gonna see that shake out. And I think ultimately security is gonna end up owning it.
I agree with you. I think security likes to own the sexy parts of identity, if there's such a thing. I think the parts which are administrative, like you mentioned, like birthright access,
right,
or offboarding, as long as it doesn't impact a crown jewel application,
right,
where we don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
But I see your point. I think more and more CISOs are taking on the administrative tasks that IT used to own, and some of those include identity.
Right.
The other way of looking at it, I think, also is we're starting to realize that the risk within identity as a continuum starts from birthright, starts from the beginning of an employee or a bot being created.
Yeah. So I want to ask you from you've been a CISO, right? So you've sat in the seat that either everybody wants or nobody wants. So when you look at kind of looking forward to the future and where identity is going, like what excites you about it to say, hey, like this is where this is going, to the point where you decided, hey, like CISO's cool, but I kind of want to go in and get to this and like build something from scratch because I see something coming there. What was that kind of like prompted you to say, hey, this is kind of where I want to look at next?
It's a great question. I think that more recently, the issues that were plaguing the business around customer identity, the incidents that were coming up most often, and the pain points from our internal customers, because at the end of the day, we're here to serve both external and internal customers, were all around identity, right? You know, when I think about time at Whole Foods, I probably spend more time with the identity director or leader over identity than I did with my own team. And he didn't report to me. He reported to the head of infrastructure.
Right.
But I was spending more time with him because it was so important to our business. It was so important to, you know, operational effectiveness. It was so important to incident response that, and he was getting sick of talking to me, you know? So I said, at some point, we got to fix this conundrum of the data that identity captures, the data non-identity people capture that are valuable to identity people, et cetera. There's some silos that have to be solved.
Yeah, and listen, I also always tell people, if you don't think identity is important, like turn off access to all 80 membership groups and just watch what happens. Like it affects the business in so many ways that I think we don't really think about. And so I constantly see organizations go, oh, we're gonna tackle this identity problem. We're gonna start this identity project. And they hand it off to like random organizations and like somebody gets picked, like it's your job to go fix identity. And they realize it's like, I've got to talk to how many different organizations? I've got to do what, like, where are all these places that it touches? And, you know, I won't go on the people process technology rant. I'll save that for another podcast because audiences heard it before. But I mean, it really is true. There's so much more to it than just that. And so I think as we've elevated identity over the past decade to where it's actually a front of mind conversation, I'm interested to see how we reshape the organizations to match that, right? Because I don't think, and you would know better, right? So I'm gonna ask you this, like, I currently don't think like CISO organizations are structured to even handle having identity teams, right?
Yeah, and we make that mistake. I'll just say, speaking as a former CISO, if I was to think about how to absorb an identity team into my current organization, I would almost look at it as the identity leader would be a functional leader, and then identity ops would go under SecOps or a similar type function. Or, you know, identity engineering could go under security engineering, but that's a really bad decision, right? Because what ends up happening is the traditional security operations leader or security engineering leader will look at identity and say, well, if you guys did your job, I don't need to have to manage this. I can just build it into my workflows. And unfortunately, whether it's a combination of business complexity or tool complexity, and I don't want to pick on any particular tool at this point, but I feel like we've created enough, let's say, you know, a mesh, if you will, that makes it hard to detangle, and everyone ends up getting frustrated. So if I was to do it right, I'd actually keep the identity teams separate. I'd also have them have a dotted line to either something like operations someone that's more attuned to the business. Maybe someone in the customer success side, because customer identity is so important.
Yeah.
But I think it makes sense to have it under the CISO. I just don't think the CISO should be the only or the main stakeholder for identity management, or else the identity leader that you hire will not be happy.
Interesting. Okay. Random question. Do you guys have like a CISO like therapy group where all you guys like kind of exchange messages and talk to each other and just kind of?
We do, yeah.
Like, hey man, I woke up at 3 a.m. this morning and looking at these security incidents and what am I gonna do?
So yeah, we've evolved that group to multiple Slack channels and a couple of WhatsApp groups. But I think you and I talked about this the other day, where CISOs last about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is having that split brain, right? I have to manage the politics of the organization. I've got to be a C-level executive, but I also have to know the details because my team is not a massive organization like the CTO or the COO.
Right, yeah.
And at the same time, my team needs to be this care and feeding with your team. And if you show up to your team and say, I created this pretty dashboard, and I really don't care about the fact that we could only do 50% of it, you have to empathize. You have to understand that, you know, they're working their butts off and they're fighting the good fight. And I think that becomes almost a psychological challenge for CISOs.
Yes. Okay. So we're gonna switch topics a little bit. As we kick off like this, season 2 of the podcast, we've got a list of guests that we're excited to have on. I'm not gonna tell you who they are right now because you have to tune in. Like, why would I tell you now? And then you're not gonna tune in, and we're like, whatever. But with the list of guests that we've been talking to, like, what are you most excited? What conversations get you excited that you're looking to have like this season?
This evening, or just going forward to season 2?
Well, just going forward with season 2, and also this evening,
yeah, okay.
however you want to answer.
Well, I think I'm always learning, right? So I think the big thing is coming from a CISO to a startup, I made the mistake of thinking I know all the answers because I've been in a number of CISO roles. But the truth is identity is complex, identity situations are unique, infrastructures are unique, and identity is stuck between a rock and a hard place in many instances. And I think learning from the audience is going to be great, and the guests we have.
Yeah.
I think the second thing is, and I don't want to use buzzwords like generative AI or automation or any of those things that are happening, or cloud native or whatever. But I think that's going to impact identity, right?
Oh,
and I think
absolutely.
that the market is moving faster than I ever expected it to from a competitive landscape. And so I'd love to pick the brains of practitioners, founders, product people, etc.
Yeah.
That's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the things I talked about early in the beginning of the year, right, when I kind of saw how the landscape was going to set up, right, with how identity security was being marketed, how the identity teams were the identity vendor companies were starting to talk about like security, and they're trying to get to Black Hat and started talking more of these things. And it was a slow progress, but I started to see it actually start to pick up. And I kind of, made the prediction earlier this year that like we're going to see an acceleration of like security and identity, like really starting to figure out like how does this happen, right? And when Cisco made the Ort acquisition, it didn't surprise me, but it was just like, okay, it's the next kind of domino, right? And I knew that after that, okay, now these security teams are really going to start looking at identity. They're trying to figure out how to offer this, because we're realizing and that just having all the security data and the log data and activity data doesn't mean anything if I don't know who it correlates to, right? And so how, as a security guy, as a network gal, like how do I start thinking about identity and what this means? Because identity to them means something completely different, right? And so I think with that and already the pressure from customers to say this convergence of IAM platforms, I just think it was going to be an accelerant, right? We're going to see this market just kind of transform itself. I think it's going to be in less than 2 years.
Yeah, I think there's two things that came to mind while you were talking. One was I was thinking about previous jobs where you mentioned being up at 3 a.m, CISO therapy group or something along those lines. It's unfortunate, but a lot of times the SecOps team will wake up everybody, and a lot of times because the incident involves a person or a identity or a use of an identity, they'll wake up the identity guy or gal, right? And so there's a silo within the community. Data sharing is one, right?
Right.
I think the second thing you mentioned about the pace of change, and this is where it's going to get really interesting for you and I, when we get guests from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
So when we meet somebody maybe from product marketing and we use a new buzzword that Gartner just popped out, right? And we say identity threat detection response, ITDR.
Right.
That's kind of becoming a buzzword, right?
Yeah.
And I heard one called ISPM. And I think I mentioned it to you, Identity Security Posture Management.
Yeah.
And so, and it's funny because product marketing guys will say, oh yeah, that makes complete sense. That's so cool. And you talk to a practitioner and they're like, what are you talking about, dude? You're full of shit.
As we
Stop.
offend all the marketers in the room.
Exactly.
Sorry, Lance. So let's stay on this topic real quick, ITDR, and then we'll switch. I've got a bold proclamation that I want to get your response to a little bit later. But since you brought up ITDR, it's near and dear to my heart. We're going to stay right there. So I think it was about maybe 3 weeks ago probably a little bit longer, but maybe about a month ago in the newsletter. I kind of went at it with Gartner because I looked up like how they were looking to define an ITDR, right? And in essence, ITDR is just a practice, right? So identity threat detection response, it's really just it's really a practice and a set of things and how you respond to something and basing around identity. But what I didn't personally like was that a lot of companies, and Gartner was pushing it towards actually protecting the identity systems themselves and the infrastructure, whether it's configured the right way. And I'm like, okay, yes, but you also actually have to worry about the actual identity itself, right? Because at the end of the day, if I can get to the account and I can get to that permissions, that's what I'm going to use. I don't really care if it's Okta, if it's CyberArk. I don't care about the actual tool itself. I care about the identities and permissions it has. And so I wrote this long post like I tend to do in the newsletter. Subscribe if you haven't already, theidentitydedi.com. Okay. But my biggest thing is like we need to actually focus on the identity itself, right? And that's the exciting thing I see about ITDR is it's going to kind of force a forcing function to have these discussions of what does a response workflow look like to an identity team? Like, hey, something tells you that 20% of your users don't have MFA configured, and they're all accessing these privileged accounts. Like, what does a response workflow look like for them? Yeah, you could create tickets to go configure them, but like, how do you do that when you see something that says, okay, it's these admin accounts and it's to these credentials for the production server? Like, that's an incident. We should be responding to that, right? Right now, identity teams don't do that at all, right? They're just used to getting tickets and provisioning and creating accounts. And the security teams are like, okay, we see this, but we don't know those tools. We don't go to fix it. So I think this entire process, and as people are turning it into a product, it's really just this discussion, a feature set of like, what does this really look like, and how do we again transition the organization to kind of doing that? So what are your thoughts on it?
I agree with you. I think I mentioned it to you, I think a while ago, where I saw something similar from Gartner where ITDR included the protection of infrastructure of identity.
Right, yeah.
And I don't feel like that's part of, it just doesn't seem right? Because ITDR, as you mentioned, right, there's a SOAR component, security operation and automation response. There's a detection engineering component. There's a visibility component. There's a attribution component. There's reporting. There's a bunch of things, right? So I think there is something there around SOAR Lite for identity plus a few things that have been missing in terms of visibility into SaaS, into public cloud, et cetera, identities. But I think bundling infrastructure as, just because it's an identity infrastructure entity or asset, I think will dilute the value of ITDR.
Yeah, I agree, right? I don't, we tend to think that it's like we're treating this infrastructure like it's any different than anything else, right? It's still just an application of the product at the end of the day. Like, there's nothing special about it. But look, I'm glad we're having these conversations. I'm glad to see some of the heat happening there, because a lot of us practitioners who've been doing this for a while, we've always said, like, once the bad guys figure out that, like, CyberArk has all the keys to the castle, like, we're screwed, right? Like, once they start figuring out, like, I don't want to go after the application, I don't want to go after emails, like, I want to go after the Oktas and the CyberArks and these tools, because that's what you're using to administer all these things, right? And for so long, all these tools were in the background. They were administrative tools. Like, nobody really knew what they were, and now that's changing, right? Because they are out in the forefront, which I don't think is a bad thing, but it's not. Again, we got to learn how to like live in this world where, what I would say, like, security professionals have lived in the entire life. Like, they know that we've got to defend these things. So yeah, I was gonna switch to another topic and I can't remember. No, I do now. Okay, so speaking to just kind of future of identity, state of identity, where we're at. So I spent the last 2 weeks, I was at Octane last week in San Francisco. We are here in lovely Austin, Texas. SoulPoint had their Navigate conference, their big user conference. And it was very interesting, like, the news that kind of came out of it, right? So Okta, in a very Okta fashion, right? Very, very visionary. And I give them credit for that all the time. They're a great marketing company. They've always had great vision. And it was everything I expected. They were going to talk a lot about AI, which they did, right? They featured AI rolled into just about all of their products. They talked a lot about, they don't call it the converged identity platform, but that's literally what they're talking about, and they're building. And look, they have the pieces. But it was interesting to see like how they presented it. And the question becomes, with all of these companies we're going to have, is how are they going to pull this off? And here's what I mean by that, right? So a little bit of a history lesson. This isn't new for identity. Like, we've had big, giant platforms before. It was like 10 or 15 years ago. They were horrible. It was trash. Like, nobody liked it. Everybody hated it. And so that's what started like this kind of best of breed thing. Everybody went to their corners. We're going to specialize in what we want to do. And that was great, right? But customers are like, I've got to buy how many tools? I've got to integrate how many things? And so now we're kind of back, right? As we all know, especially in technology, everything repeats itself. But because of that, what we had was a separation of knowledge. So if you got like an SSO vendor company, like, they've got SSO experts, and now you're saying they want to do IGA and PAM. Again, not saying you can't learn these things, but you haven't been built that way. You don't have the expertise there. And now you have to bring in those complexities, plus integrate them into a platform and still deliver on customers. And the thing about Okta, the only kind of challenge I would say for them is that you kind of pick the easy path, which was SSO, because there's a lot of standards there. It's pretty easy to set up and get authentication. Like, you don't have a lot of crazy requirements most of the time around SSO. You get into IGA and start talking to these customers, they're like, listen, every other Thursday, there's a server over here, and if it's Tuesday, I want the ticket to go here, and on Wednesday, I want this. Like, you get all these complexities, and we've given these customers that for over a decade. So to come in and just say, yeah, we're gonna deliver some kind of IGA thing that's a little different, that's gonna be hard. And they've yet to kind of pull that off and pay them the same way. And so it's like, and then you wanna continue to add on to this. I think they're gonna struggle with that, right? I hope they prove me wrong. I'd love to see them innovate and pull this off, but I think that's gonna be a hard pill to swallow. And I think a lot of these identity vendors are gonna start hitting that, right? They realize they gotta go build a platform, but how do you do that and solve all of these problems like all at the same time, right? Which if I'm a customer, that's the first thing I'm asking. So what's your thoughts on, looking at these companies trying to build out this platform and, pros and cons, right? Like, I want you to put on your CISO hat. Like, if a vendor's coming to you and saying, listen, I got everything for you. Samir, I'm gonna solve all your problems. And you're like, but weren't you like selling tacos yesterday? Like, how are you gonna give me everything?
I say good luck. Let's start there, right? So I think the hard thing is changing the DNA, right?
Yeah.
So Okta, as you mentioned, started in single sign-on, solving a problem, right? I think they did a pretty good job with Kayam because they've always been a very consumer-oriented company, which is good. I think the Auth0 acquisition, you can hear mixed reviews. I don't know if it's good, bad, or ugly.
Right.
But working with developer identity is a different animal. And then now with this, and I didn't follow the Okta, I didn't go to Octane, but it's a lot for them to accomplish in the next 9 months. I think there was up to 9 months.
Yeah.
I think they're going to have to, to your point, it's been federated to the point where they're going to get feedback that's different from a identity engineering leader, from a SecOps engineering leader, from a privileged administrative tool manager, right, who's going to give very different feedback. And as you know, the Fortune 500 has entrenched itself in a lot of different tools. And so to pull out a CyberArk or pull out SailPoint and say, we're going to do Okta for everything, right, that itself is a political nightmare for a CISO to go fight, right, when he or she is faced with the news item of the day, right, or the week. So I think that's going to be the challenge for Okta. I think the other piece is that, and I don't know all the ins and outs. I do know one of their former CISOs. I don't know if they are ready to embrace an internal security leader, whether it's a CISO or they bring in a chief product officer from Palo Alto or somebody with a security DNA that's going to make them think about things differently. I haven't seen them do it. Maybe you've seen more, and maybe at this conference they talked about an advisory board. I don't know. But my problem is that I think people assume it's easy. I assumed it was easy. Heck, when I started building, I was like, hey, yeah, IGA can't be that hard.
Right.
But to your point, there is complexities. There's an expectation around platform, a future platform, if not immediate, and different iterations of the same problem, manifestations of that problem in different situations, and you got to pick, right?
Yeah.
And if I was Okta, and I'm going to look and say, Fortune 500, I can get, $5 million deal or $1 million deal versus mid-market and small, which is where they started, as you know, in the Bay Area, and that's a $50K deal.
Yep.
The pressure is going to come from the board because they probably get traded. Go after the big guys.
Yeah.
And that's good and bad, because again, if I go and try to sell to the JP Morgans of the world or the Amazons of the world or whoever, they're gonna just dump a whole list of problems on me. And how do I prioritize? Because everyone's gonna call their problem the biggest problem.
Right.
So I wish them luck. And I'm not saying it's bad. I think if anyone can do it, it's gonna be one of these guys. I think the other side is obviously Thoma Bravo with, I think it's Ping, CyberArk, and
so it's Ping, SailPoint, ForgeRock, and
okay.
There's one more I can't remember right now.
Okay, so they've got an army of So I think that's going to be interesting as well.
Yeah. Speaking of which, right? So this week was very interesting because so SailPoint and ForgeRock are not SailPoint. Sorry, Ping and ForgeRock are now one company. So they had their user conference up in Dallas, and then SailPoint had theirs here. Both Thoma Bravo companies. Yeah, all this week.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so it was interesting. I actually had a buddy of mine he came here for the first 2 days for Navigate and then drove up to Dallas to go catch the tail end of the Ping stuff. But yeah, listen, it was clear, so this week SailPoint, they announced a lot of their stuff, and yes, everybody's kind of leaning into their platform, right? So cool, but same type of thing. if I were to give somebody a lead, I would start with an access management product because you just have more control over the session. Like you're directly with the user, you're authenticating. There's so much more knowledge you know of at that time because you're authenticating them. When you're starting from like the IGA plane trying to build out a platform, you're in the background. Like, so it's like you have all the things that should be there, but you don't know what's actually happening, right? You need that kind of connectivity in. So it's a lot of, push integration that you got to go pull that in. And they're all going to be in this very interesting, solutions. Like, do we hop? Do we create an IDP? Like, do we do some kind of SSO? A lot of people say, no, it's commoditized, don't do it. Okay, great. But then how do we get into that? How do we get into that notion? Because we can't really partner anymore because now everybody's lining up platforms, right? Like, so they're not going to partner with this because they're kind of offering the same thing. So it's going to be very interesting to see like the IGA focused identity companies kind of fight that and how they attract that. Like if you see a focus more on like the governance of everything else, which it kind of seems like that's where SailPoint's going. So they announced SailPoint Atlas, their identity security cloud platform, which, yeah, okay. Go read that product marketing message, and if anybody can make sense out of it, please email me, because it literally reads like, hey, we're announcing this new thing that you already have. It's not new, but it is new, but you have it. How do you get it? We already gave it to you. You're welcome. It's brand new. Like, what? So you're selling me something that you already sold me. No, we're not selling it to you. We're just telling you that it's new. But I already have it? Yes, you already got it. It was just, I read that like 3 or 4 times. I'm like, somebody literally hit submit on this and said, yeah, no, that looks good. Let's do it. And of course, I got a bunch of friends at SailPoint that will now hate me after this. But look, I got to call a spade a spade. It was really interesting. But they also announced like their old file access manager tool that they've SaaSified that. Like, so they're leaning towards there, right? Then it looks like they're going to focus on, hey, we're going to build this platform, and then we're going to focus on these technologies, these applications that we bought, and they're really going to lean into the governance and AI and maybe kind of automating some of that. But if I could be a fly on the wall in their product leadership discussions, at some point they're like, yeah, but there's a hurdle we got to cross. Like, we've got to get some kind of foot into the access management realm, because if we don't, like, how are we going to truly take action on a lot of these things, right? So it's very interesting. They also, on their roadmap for 2024, they had ITDR on there, which is going to be very interesting how they're going to pull that off, again, with no ties into the access side of it, right? Yeah. So
I think you nailed it. I think the same comment about Okta goes for SailPoint. And again, you've worked at SailPoint, you've known past leadership and current leadership, right? And I think there's some very smart people there that I met early on in the SailPoint journey, like 15 some years ago. I think, again, they were built very much like a workflow automation to some extent, with consulting help, of course, around SOX 404,
yep.
Oracle, governance, ERP, as I remember back in the day, right? Because I was in financial services. But I think the DNA of moving to the cloud has been a struggle for them, from what I've heard and seen.
Yeah.
And this is even before I started a company, right?
Yeah.
I was always in touch with those folks. And the second thing I saw was the mindset around security and threat detection. Because when you go and talk to a board of directors as a CISO, compliance is something you'll talk about with the audit committee, and it'll be just like did we meet our regulatory requirements? And if we didn't, what are we going to do about it? And figure it out, whether you do it on SharePoint or an Excel spreadsheet, get it done, right? Keep the regulators happy. When it comes to security, that becomes a broader, more than just an audit level discussion. And those will be around proactive security, what are we seeing, detection response, and metrics around that. And for SailPoint to evolve into that story is going to take more than just a product coming out, right? It's going to be a complete reset of their DNA. And so I think them being owned by, I think you mentioned Thoma Bravo,
yeah.
where Ping is owned, et cetera. I don't know where the play is, because I did read something about Ping and ForgeRock working together.
No, they're merged now.
They merged now. Okay. Yeah. So I think SailPoint being on its own, unless the DNA changes in a good way, right? I'm not saying everybody, but you need to kind of start listening to your security leaders and your identity leaders, not just your workflow leaders and your, keep things running as they are. Cash cow, if you will, because people will eventually, I'm not saying it'll happen overnight, but they'll eventually say, Okta did it, and they did it really well, and I'm just going to move on. I'm not saying Okta is the one that'll do it, but Microsoft did it, or Palo Alto did it, or somebody did it, right? and they just can't live and breathe off of that. The legacy
Listen,
stuff.
it's a success, right? You know, die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain, right? And so, you know, I think it's that goal that every company wants to get to. Like, you want to be around for a long time, you want to do all these things, but doing that means you've been around a long time. Like, now you've got to handle, you know, that startup hustle mentality to now scalability to now profitability. That's one journey. Now it's the long-term one. It's like, you may have to start and do that over again, right? But now, how do you do it when you have, you know, tech debt and customers and like you've had all this stuff, and how do you can constantly evolve and change who you are as an organization to kind of meet those things? And so it's a challenge that I think both Okta and SoulPoint, you know,
Absolutely.
face, right?
Well, I think I was going to add one more comment to that. I was thinking about a conversation I think you and I had when we first met, right? I think I told you this when I started Balkan ID. One CISO, Fortune 200 CISO, mentioned to me, he's like, you don't get fired for implementing SailPoint, right? It's a comment that people have said about IBM and Oracle, right? The difference, and I've realized it, he's partially right, but not completely, because if you think about Oracle ERP, it's embedded in HR, it's embedded in payroll, it's embedded in supply chain, it's part of your business process. And so if the HR module doesn't work, you're not going to get fired, you have to fix it, and you can yell at a couple of Oracle people, get some money to get fixed, maybe partner with your HR team. But if you have a breach, and it's an identity level breach, and somebody clicked OK on an access review that they shouldn't have, even though they were given intelligence, and you go back and say, SailPoint doesn't give me the intelligence I need, no board is going to stop you from changing SailPoint.
Yeah.
No board is going to say, hey, especially if they trust you and you've built a reputation with the board, they'll say, do what you got to do to fix it. Right? And if it means you bring in another tool just for ITDR, and that ITDR tool is your wedge for a startup like whatever, and that startup ends up doing better and better things, then eventually SailPoint and Okta will get replaced.
Right.
That's what I would. So that old school mentality of you're not going to get fired because you installed SailPoint or implemented SailPoint is not true anymore.
No. Very interesting.
I don't know if you agree, but I want to hear your perspective because you work there. So
yeah, I mean, look, I've always wanted to do more than just the compliance aspect of it, right? So SailPoint absolutely was born on like, hey, basically we're going to replace your spreadsheets. Like, that's how it started, right? Shout out to Microsoft Excel, like the greatest tool ever. Like, how many companies run their entire organization through Microsoft Excel? But like that was always the bread and butter. Let's figure this out. Let's get compliance. Let's just automate your spreadsheets. And then from there, let's continue to make governance easier. You needed visibility, all these things or whatever. But even when I saw that, I was like, we can, you know, you can push past that and start to automate and get rid of a lot of these things and make them easier. But there was never a need to, and it was never a sense of like, let's go where the customer's going to go and anticipate their needs forward. Let's just continue to meet these needs here, right? And it made sense when you look at where the identity industry was. Okay, let's stay there. I just think that it is going into becoming a platform and spreading outside of that. It does open you up, to your point, to like, okay, if you don't meet these things, right, then we can easily replace that. Now, the strength that they have is, you know, for those of you young enough to remember Lotus Notes, like these tools, like once they're in, they're in. It's not an easy thing to rip these things out, right?
Yeah.
So
it's not going to be something that. So on that topic, right? So let me flip a question to you. If you were to start a company today in identity, which domain within identity would you focus on, and why?
So if I were to start a company today, which I kind of did. Honestly, I would focus on the ITDR market. And here's the reason why. Because it's the next 2 years, 3 years max, we're going to figure out what identity security actually really means. You know, the past 3 years, we've marketed it to everybody, and we fooled all of our customers and said, oh, identity security, and we wanted people to start thinking about it that way, but we weren't really developing the products there. Like, we started doing that probably late, I'll call it last year, and now you're starting to see that acceleration. But the reason is because I think that's the evolution of where identity goes next, right? So now we're all admitting identity is a new perimeter. Everything starts with identity. Identity is at the center of security. Okay, so then how do we develop and build tools to manage identity like not like as an administrative task, but truly like as a security task.
An asset, like
right,
an asset.
Yeah, exactly, right?
A critical
here's,
asset.
Here's this identity, and I'm assigning these permissions, and so what does that mean within my organization? And how do I manage that? How do I manage the risk, the word that we all know and love, that people love to show, but you never really do anything with? And so I think I would go there because that area, number one, is it's exciting. There's a lot of new things you can do technology-wise and really start to drive a lot of this automation. But you can also get to the point where you can actually start to show real value to identity and explain, like, what does it really mean that this user has these 10 applications and can access these things? Like, what does that mean, right? So instead of giving a manager an access cert and says, okay, here's all the applications they have, sign off on it, great. What does that really mean, right? Something simple is like, okay, this user, here's all the things you approved this, and if you're approving this, I want you to know that this means that David can access the production AWS server at any time. Hey, I don't really know if David should be doing that, right? Like, now you can start providing context, and when you have context, you can actually start to make automation a lot easier because you understand what things are, and you have like clear visibility of what it means and what the impact of that access has. And I think that's kind of like the next wave of where identity is going to go, and it truly starts to look more like security. So I would go there because it allows you to have the conversation with the security teams and say, how can we make this better, right? Because it's not getting easier for organizations to defend against this stuff, right? You're going to have to start having tools that enable you to see these things coming, to be able to ingest this data and actually truly take action on it, right? We're still so far behind on the security side where like I think the average incident response is like 30 some odd days or something like that. But I was like, it takes you that long to kind of figure out something. And I'm not using that to point at anybody or say you're doing a bad job. It's just, there's a lot of stuff to go through, right? And the whole point of tools, why we make anything, is to make our jobs easier, make our lives easier. I don't know about the rest of you, but I am like lazy. I want something that makes my job easier, right? Like, that's why I have a Tesla. I can just hit the thing and it drives itself. And I'm like, great, take me home. Don't fall asleep when you do that. But so that's the basis of why we create things. And so that area excites me. That's where I think we can really start to deliver the next value. And I would make the hypothesis that doing that, we can actually start to solve the real problem we've always had is, how do we explain value of these tools to the business? If I can show you like the context and what this means to your business and what that access like truly means down to like the risk level, why they have this much access, and even get it down to like how much data they can access, what a breach would cost, like really break this down to the numbers and give you true context, I think that's real value to the business now, because now it makes sense. Like, I mean, imagine, I've never sat in the CISO seat, but like if I could come to you and show you a tool that says like, here's all the access, here's what it means, right? Here's your riskiest organization, they have this much access. If a breach happens, it's probably gonna happen here. And so here are the areas that if you put investment to and you get this down, is gonna go the furthest, right? I would assume that would help and be a lot more helpful than just, here's this nice dashboard with all these little alerts and things, and here you go, it looks pretty, but good luck trying to figure out what all that means. My guess.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm not sure if the CISO it depends on the size of the company, of course. I'm not sure if a CISO would make the decision to buy an ITDR tool or even an IGA tool for that matter, right? In fact, in my experience in talking to CISOs, as we talk about our journey in what we're building at Balkan ID, a lot of the times, because identity governance touches so many different folks, along with ITDR, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen who need to make a decision, and that's good and bad, right? Yeah. In your mind with ITDR, right, would it be something you'd still sell to the, kind of say, the director of identity, or would you sell it more to SecOps, or does it depend? Yeah,
it depends on how the organization is structured, right? How I would go about it and sell it is I would sell it to the director of identity, because I would say, listen, I'm going to help you understand like what your security brothers and sisters are looking at and what that means to you and where you need to start driving interactions within your IAM platform, right? So I'm making that sell as like, I'm going to help you be a helpmate to security, right? We're going to start from there because we're going to have it from an identity-centric view. Because I think, hypothesis is that it's going to be easier to teach and show identity teams. I don't have to teach them security, but like give them a little bit more context than to bring security all the way over to identity and all the things that have to go over there, right? And I think eventually it would sit like with a blended security and identity team is where it would go. So depending on the organization, like if they're completely separate and they never talk, I'm probably going to talk more towards the security team. Like, this is going to make more sense for you guys. If at least they're in the same organization and they're like kind of an identity centric security team. I'm like, yeah, this is gonna be the identity team's tool, and they're gonna work with you guys on this, and this is how it's gonna sit. And it's gonna get them to talking, right? And I think that's gonna be for the better of the organization in general, because I've just seen too many organizations where like the security team, they couldn't even tell you like where the identity team sits, right? Like they don't even know like who the person is or who the boss is. Like they just don't know anything about it. And I'm like, so how are you guys mitigating these incidents? Like if you don't even know like who to go to say, well, this is what we need to go fix and change. We need to remove this access, right? Oh, we put in a ticket. I was like, that's fantastic.
So I completely agree with you. I want to just add one comment, right? You mentioned something about tools being there to make life easier, right?
Yeah.
I think if we can start thinking about tools as also breaking down silos, because humans are complex, organizations are complex as well. And I think you're absolutely right. I think if we can, and I'll say this to all the ITDR startups out there, including, you mentioned that you might be doing one. I think starting with the identity leader, but solving what they need, not just what they want, and then helping them partner with the SecOps team, so they're not woken up in the middle of the night. They have a dashboard or a role for SecOps to look at. That would be ideal.
Yeah.
The second thing is that SecOps teams, traditionally, and this may be just my bad luck, they like to be kind of a black box. Right? They like to be, we know what we're doing, we grew up in the NSA, Israeli Defense Forces, 8200, leave us alone, we know what we're doing.
Right.
Just tell us what you saw and we'll go work on it, right? I think that mentality has to evolve, because if you're going to depend on a team of 20, 30, even 40, or unless you're JP Morgan, which has hundreds of them, it's not smart. You need human defenders. You need people who have different experiences on how threats are kind of manifest themselves. And identity people think of things differently as well,
yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
when they see risk, they should have an opportunity to partner during the incident response process with their knowledge and experience, right? And unfortunately, I don't see that happening as much as it should. I think the tool or the product or the platform, use whatever term you like, needs to help break that silo down.
Yeah.
And that will be a win-win for everybody.
Oh, totally agree. All right, so we had something completely else planned, but as always, we went over. So, we make stuff up as we go along. So let's open this up for Q&A to our wonderful audience. Thanks everybody for being here tonight. Everybody except Maine, make sure you go get something to drink. Totally complimentary on the house. Oh man, they already let him have it. So any questions from anybody in the crowd? Like, we'll do it Ask Me Anything style. If I don't know, then what do you? Oh, you want one of the microphones? Okay, cool. That would make sense.
You want to give mine?
Here. Okay, let me use his.
Because you're going to answer all the questions. He's going to answer all the questions.
Sure. I just thought they were just yelling. All right. Raise your hand. Cedric, come bring you a microphone. Or questions, comments, concerns. Come on, people. Don't be shy. All right.
I don't need a microphone, but
Probably use one just for the audio recording, and we make sure we get all of it.
so you said something really interesting, how we're doing to kind of repeat the same things that we've done in the past, right? It's platform driven. And you watch each one of these companies go out and buy no name, no brand, little products, and then say, hey, we're now in the PAM space. We're now IGA. We're now SSO and everything. And when does that end? Because you can't have a platform best of breed if you continue to go out and slap on, this little company that nobody ever heard of with $1 million in revenue, right?
Yeah.
Why do we, is this a private equity problem? Is it a VC problem? Or is it just lack of insight into what it really takes to be strong in those markets, and they think they can break in with these smaller tools?
Oh man. Okay, so I'm gonna take this off so I can pass it to Samir because I want his input on this too. I think part of it is a business model problem when you come down to the numbers. So one of the things I hated as an engineer, right, was every engineer hates tech debt, right? So you always build something, there's a better way you can do it, you can make it more efficient. And the one thing that you always hated to hear from the sales guys and the product guys is, guess what? It doesn't matter, right? Because we sold it good enough, and so we'll never come back. And so you kind of build up this tech debt. And where I'm going with that is that I think part of the reason why you see these kind of acquisitions, because they just break it down to numbers, right? If I've got a 100 engineer organization and I want to go into the PAM space and I'm an access management vendor, right? I could go spend the money and resources and man hours to go build that myself, go find a China expertise, however long it's going to take me to build it, market it, put it out there, or I just go buy this product, bring them in, at worst sell them separately, and then slowly kind of work them in. And the numbers, so they say, always work out that way where it's kind of cheaper to acquire. Over the long run, I don't think it is. I think what we're going to see differently this time, and I said this when Cisco made their acquisition, right, of Ort, is that I think people are going to market the platform, but I think the answer this time around is more so like, hey, we have all these products. Let's kind of be more like Walmart, where it's like, we have everything you need. It's all here. So you don't really have to leave the store if you don't want to. So let's make sure that you have these options. What do you want to do? You need PAM, so we can use this product. We got this product. I think it's going to work more like that than trying to really shove this platform down the customer's throats and say it's all here, it's all right, you can use all of these things. And so I hope what we see is as they build these platforms, because we have better open standards, you see more open connectivity into it, right? So that was the biggest thing that accelerated SSO was we had OAuth, we had OIDC, so it was a lot easier and to make these connections. I think when we start to see the standards come in, like with shared signals, with SCIM, we're gonna have a little bit more open layers where, yes, they can have all these things, they'll buy them, they'll always say that it's cheaper, but you can offer the customer like solutions. You can use ours, or if you want a different one, you can plug it in, we can still talk, you can still get the same thing. I think that's going to hopefully be the difference now. I mean, that's the whole reason why we went SaaS, is you can build these and make them a little bit more extensible. At least that's my hope. But at the end of the day, capitalism, man, like, if the CFO say the numbers work, that's what they're going to do. That's my thoughts. What do you think?
I think two things, right? One is, I think it's uninformed people making decisions. Because there's an assumption that if I buy a PAM tool, I'm suddenly going to be as good as CyberArk or close, right? It's not. It's just, I think people making the decisions are not understanding the complexity of, or the sophistication of some of these tools that have been built. That's one. I think the second thing is, I feel like identity startups in the last 5 years, I'm seeing so many, right? In the IGA, ITDR, PAM, I'm seeing a lot. In the past, I think there were just a few of them and they just get snapped up because they're like, oh, I got a $5 million offer or $20 million, $30 million offer. I'm just going to get bought because eventually I'm not going to be able to compete with Okta or SailPoint or whatever. I think big pockets are coming into identity now. I'm seeing that. And maybe this should be for Thoma Bravo, right? Thoma Bravo is doing, I think, the right thing is one. I think the second thing is Palo Alto's playbook is something that identity companies should look at, which is wait till, there's not just product market fit, but at least some level of consistent, repeatable revenue from the consistent, stable customer base, right? Get to like 5, 8, 10 million of revenue, and Palo Alto will snap them up and find a way to kind of integrate them, right? I think that's a smarter move than what you said, which I think is just the wrong people making the decisions, frankly.
Cool. Anybody else? Oh, we got one.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about connectivity here. We've looked at some identity governance products that we use. What we want to think about them. I get the big ticket items into my system, but it's the SaaS wall. There's just so many out there, and I have no connectivity to it. How do we solve what needs to happen to solve it? I can get 30% of my apps in, but I need the other 70% too.
So, okay, in that other 70%, you're saying they're mostly SaaS? All SaaS. So, honestly, the answer there is standards. So that's where SCIM tools come in, right? Like the ability to be able to reach out, interrogate the app, get the information back. But you are seeing some connectivity tools. You look at what Radiant Logic does, you look at what Aquera does, and these are companies that basically proxy those connections for you to where they give you kind of one interface, but they can kind of go out and discover those. I think what's going to have to happen to make that easier is that we've got to get more of the SaaS tools to implement more of the standards, so that way you can make it kind of discoverable, right? And I think it'd be interesting to, not to kind of delve in and like solve your problem now, but it'd be interesting to understand like what apps you have and whether or not they have SCIM or not. Because most SaaS apps now, they have a SCIM interface. Especially if they're going to integrate to like Azure or AD, like they're going to build a SCIM interface. Usually they do. If they don't, then that's interesting. But the short answer is it's standards to be able to get that connectivity. Otherwise, it's the same thing that you're going to have, these IGA companies are going to have to spend the dollars to go and develop all these connectors. And they just don't want to do it because that's just a lot of work and you got to maintain it and then all this, that. So I think as standards continue to mature in that aspect, that part's going to get a little easier.
Yeah, I think to your point around the SaaS sprawl, right, which is a broader problem as well. There's two things, I think there's two shifts that are happening in the market. One is the traditional CASB products that were built 10, 15 years ago were kind of inline, et cetera, had a proxy to your point. I think now there's some unique capabilities around, whether it's a Chrome browser plugin or scanning emails to see signups. People are finding more and more ways to detect. There's browser companies, secure browser companies, there's zero trust companies. So there's a lot more telemetry that IGA companies can plug into. So they have to build those integrations. I think the hardest thing, unfortunately, unless somebody can build this, and maybe it's another startup idea, to get fine-grained entitlement data, metadata around Workday permissions, Workday repositories, Workday last login setups, et cetera. Like the traditional SSO and IGA tools don't have that, so we have to build those integrations. And who can build them the fastest, who can focus on the right integrations, who can solve the biggest crown jewel problems today with a combination of integrations to new age CASB / SASE / secure browser platforms, plus build out the SaaS integrations are going to win, in my opinion.
Cool. Anybody else? Nope. All right. That was a quick Q&A session.
Yeah, no hecklers.
Yeah, nobody answered anything. No hecklers. Nobody said
I thought
anything
SailPoint would be here heckling you because of all you said.
They just
Or didn't
decided
say.
not to come.
Let me just say,
Right?
didn't
No,
say.
they just decided not to come. It's all good. All right, so listen, as we wrap up, I've kind of teased the big announcement for a while now, and so I'll make it today with all of you here, all of you watching by the time you guys see this. So for the last 9 months, I have been working with a collection of people. We've been launching this kind of startup, and today, you guys get to hear it first. Everybody else will hear it tomorrow. But happy to announce that Raincoat.ai is a live product. We have our first demo available. It is a startup. It is going to be in the ITDR space, which is why Samir kept asking me all about ITDR. But it is something that, as long as I've been in the industry, I've always kind of been looking at different problems to solve. This one kind of came up. It was kind of right timing, right team, put it together. So we're really excited about it. So this past year has been very interesting. It won't change anything that we do with the podcast. I'm still going to, you guys know me, I'm still going to say whatever I want to say all the time and give unbiased information, but really happy to kind of make this journey. So Raincoat.ai, you guys can check out the website. Hit me up if you ever have any questions about it. But with that, we're going to wrap up the podcast here in Austin, Texas at XO Nightclub. Appreciate everybody coming out. When you guys see this, make sure you subscribe, hit up the YouTube channel, subscribe to the newsletter, theidentitydedi.com. Me and Samir will be back for so many episodes this season, interviewing different people, and maybe we'll do another live one. I don't know, maybe Denver, maybe LA, I don't know, who knows, we'll see. Who knows where we'll pop up? You guys let us know what city you want us to pop up in, and then we'll say no because we don't have the money. No, just kidding, thanks. So you guys know what it is, be good to each other, be kind to each other, love each other. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.